The Foreign Affairs Committee are continuing their inquiry into the appointment of Peter Mandelson and the security implications of that. We have in front of us today Catherine Little. We're very grateful to see you. Thank you very much for coming. Would you mind giving us your full title and what your responsibilities are?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee this morning. I have two core responsibilities that are relevant to the hearing today. The first is I'm the senior official responsible for overseeing the government's response to the humble address. And there are two things that I do as part of that. I oversee the operational response across the whole of government, and I also advise the Prime Minister on how to ensure that the government fully complies with the humble address. The second role I have is I am the Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary and the Chief Operating Officer for the Civil Service. And in that role, I'm also responsible for the oversight of services to government departments, of which there are a number which are run from the Cabinet Office. That includes UK security vetting. And I think it's important that I should say two things up front in relation to those two responsibilities. First, I have not been involved at all in either the events to appoint or the withdrawal of the former HMA for Washington. And my first involvement with this Peter Mandelson. And my first involvement was when I became responsible for the humble address in February, when I was asked to lead this process by the Prime Minister as the acting Cabinet Secretary. The second thing I should really make clear is that, as has been said in a number of pieces of evidence to you, the sanctity of the operational security vetting system is absolutely essential to the day-to-day running of national security for this country. And so in my responsibilities for overseeing security vetting, I have absolutely nothing to do with the day-to-day operations of UKSV. And that is important to safeguard both the information and to make sure that there isn't any undue interference outside of the way in which we operate with departments.
Good. I'd like you to help us with the narrative, really, I think, to begin with. I think at the beginning of Sir Oliver Robbins's evidence, he told us that the Cabinet Office had been in touch with him, I believe he said, saying that was the Cabinet Office really sure that vetting was required, presumably because Peter Mandelson was a member of the House of Lords, he was a Privy Councillor, he was a former member of the Cabinet, and also presumably as well because these sorts of political appointments are as rare as hen's teeth. So from what you understand, was there a question like that was being asked? Do you know what the discussion was between the Cabinet Office and the Foreign Office?
I don't have records of verbal conversations. In my role as gathering information in the audit trail and the fact-finding about the decisions that were undertaken, I do have access to a number of emails which have been disclosed recently to me. And what those emails set out is what I see as a very reasonable policy conversation between security officials, whereby the Foreign Office personnel security team get in touch with the UKSV and the Government Security Group in the Cabinet Office and ask the question, could they get some advice? Because the presumption had been that given Peter Mandelson had been a member of the House of Lords, that the long-standing convention that he didn't require developed vetting was assumed, and they wanted to get proper policy advice from experts on whether that was the case. And what I can see is an audit trail of discussion between security officials debating how the policy framework would apply in this instance. And I should say it is unusual, although not unprecedented, for a political appointee to take up post as an ambassador. What I can see is there is a senior official from the Government Security Group that goes back to the Foreign Office security team and advises two things. One, that this is a decision for the Foreign Office, and two, that they would advise developed vetting is sought.
Thank you. And so we know that vetting took place. Could you just explain to us, when this developed vetting happens, it's not done by the Foreign Office, it's done by the UKSV, and they produce a document, is that right?
That is correct.
Was it one document or two documents or what?
It'd be helpful to explain what happens,
yes, please do,
for the benefit of the committee and the House. So the process, which is governed by a formal agreement between UKSV and the Foreign Office, is they are classified as something called a make recommendation department, which means that UKSV do all of the vetting that they would normally undertake for any other department, and they make a recommendation that is non-binding to the Foreign Office.
The Foreign Office is an exception, along with some other government departments, I think, that Ollie Robbins was telling us. Is that right?
That is correct.
So other departments, presumably like the MOD, I would have thought, where there's just departments where there are going to be lots of these DVs.
The MOD is not a make recommendation department, and if it's useful to the committee, it might be worth just explaining some of the history of UK security vetting. And this goes back to the post-war period where national security vetting was professionalised in the formation of the Ministry of Defence. The current vetting service was formed within the Ministry of Defence many decades ago. Okay. In 2017, the government undertook to start centralising and standardising vetting procedures across government. And at this point, the MOD is overseeing vetting services, and this is transferred into the Cabinet Office as a centralised service, and that's part of a number of reforms to centralise services to departments at the time.
Okay.
As part of that centralisation, there was clearly a need to make sure that the services provided to departments were fit for purpose. And because the Foreign Office is almost a DV by default department, it is very exceptional not to require DV, they were granted this make recommendation status. And that was both a practical and a sensible way to deal with the volume of security vetting required. So to go back to the process itself, that is the context. Once UKSV complete the services that they provide to make the recommendation, they undertake a risk assessment, and they provide two overall conclusions. One sets out the level of concern, and the other sets out the overall recommendation on whether to grant developed vetting. That is non-binding. It is meant to be helpful information for the ultimate decision maker, in this case the Foreign Office, to make a final decision.
And how long is, how much, what's the volume of material that is produced by, that would have been given by the vetting body to the Foreign Office?
So at the time of the appointment, and since, the Foreign Office has access and can request access to any of the inputs that go into the vetting process. And forgive me, there might be moments where I'm not able to describe those price inputs
do what you can,
in order to protect the system. But it is a very comprehensive process, it is thorough, and it requires a significant amount of information. What I can confirm is that at any stage, the Foreign Office, as the ultimate decision maker, can request access to any of that information.
Without at this stage telling us what is in those documents, what sort of documents were put before the Foreign Office when it came to Peter Mandelson and his direct vetting?
So there are two separate points where I can see audit trails of what information was passed to the Foreign Office. At the time of the appointment, at the end of January, on the 28th of January, the UKSV summary document that I've described was sent to the Foreign Office, and that is a summary of the considerations of the case officer in reaching those two overall recommendations.
How many pages is that?
It is around 10 pages. Forgive me, I can't remember the precise number.
That's all right.
In the
So about 10 pages. So there's about 10 pages sent. Is there anything else sent?
That is it.
Okay.
What happens, and this is the case for all vetting processes, is the decision-making body then returns the decision taken by the decision-making body. And there is also a page that sets that out.
Yeah.
And I should confirm that those documents are currently being processed in accordance with the humble address. There is a second point that I can see an audit trail for, which is on the 15th of September last year. The Foreign Office security team request access to a number of documents relating to the vetting file. And on the same day, the documents requested are sent to the Foreign Office. And I don't know who, beyond the individual requesting that information, saw those documents. But my point being that anyone within the security chain can request to see information if they feel it is necessary, because they are ultimately one of the owners of that document.
I'm going to leave it to others to go through, what it means, that the form that we've all seen online now, which is the sort of traffic light form, and I know that people will want to ask about that, but I'm just trying to get things so that we just kind of get our heads around the general narrative. And you're now talking about mid-September. Now, we did hear from Ollie Robbins about he had, and I believe he said in his evidence that he had attempted to, let me just find it, and then I've got it written down here. So sorry, let me find it. He said in the middle of his evidence that he had attempted, that in September he had considered getting access to the DV file and had contacted the Cabinet Office and had been told he could not get access to that without there being a national security reasons why. I hope that I've said that correctly from everybody's memory. Yeah. Do you see any evidence of that?
The only information that I have is the information that I've gathered as part of our fact-finding, and it is the information I've just described to you. I have obviously looked at what Sir Ollie has said, and I can't at this stage see the audit trail for that request, and I don't know who Sir Ollie made that request to.
Yeah.
All I can see is that the personnel security team at the Foreign Office requested information relating to vetting on the 15th, and that was granted.
Right. Okay. Since we're on audit trails, would you have expected, when looking at the paperwork, to have been able to see an audit trail on what discussions there may have been, or the reasons for a particular decision being made, over and above anything that could have been filled in on this form?
So, at the time I informed the Prime Minister of this document and its overall conclusion, I couldn't see at that point any information. I'd not been able to obtain the information that might have shed light on the decision-making process. Since I informed the Prime Minister, the email that Sir Ollie referred to in his evidence to you has been provided to my team discharging the humble address. And that record sets out the decision to grant DV, and it also sets out some mitigations. It doesn't set out or detail the risks. Now, I can totally understand...
I'm sorry to cut across you. Who's this email to?
It's from the Director of Security, Ian Collard, and it is sent to his line manager, the Chief Operating Officer of the Foreign Office, and it's copied to the PPS to Sir Ollie. Okay. If I might finish, just sort of the context that I think is important, is I said earlier it is a very serious consideration to document at any point the contents of a vetting file. I can entirely understand why there was reticence to document that on an open system outside of the UKSV portal. I don't think it is for me to provide a judgment on the adequacy of that email, and that is why Sir Adrian Fulford will independently now review this process.
Have you seen other times when the UKSV have given a document to a department that then needs to make a decision about whether or not DV should be passed? And have you seen a pattern of the amount of documentation around it or records of decision making? And if you have, how does that compare to what Sir Ollie was doing on this occasion?
So I've only ever worked in departments that have binding requirements to accept the UKSV recommendation. I've not worked in a make recommendation department, and so I've only really seen the process that's undertaken by security officials within that context.
Okay. Then just see if I've got any. And then in February 26, I want to take you to that. So when the humble address was granted, we've touched on this a little bit, but again, I just want to, before I pass over to other members, just so that we're all clear about this. You take charge. You've got to get the documents together. The humble address is basically, effectively a very, you're having to give access to a very large number of documents around the appointment and security position of Peter Mandelson, but you've obviously got to protect the security, and there's a lot of responsibility in relation to that. But presumably your first port of call would be to go to Ollie Robbins and to talk to him about the vetting document.
So if I may, it might be useful context to set out the humble address process and the information gathering that has been undertaken. And this is a highly unique situation where we have a humble address with a fairly broad scope, which is running alongside a criminal investigation.
Yeah.
I think that is unprecedented. And teams across government, hard-working, dedicated civil servants, are working around the clock to process large amounts of information. And this committee will know better than any committee that the national security and the international relations context and the judgments that are required are highly significant and painstaking. As part of my information gathering process, there have been 4 formal requests to all permanent secretaries, including Sir Ollie. And naturally, because the Cabinet Office and the Foreign Office are the 2 departments that are most significantly impacted, given the decision-making context and background, so Ollie and I have had multiple discussions about how best to comply and how to obtain information. So the one specific meeting that I had with Sir Ollie about vetting, and I should say there's lots of debate and discussion about how to treat vetting information for all of the reasons that I've said to you. I should clearly say there was no disagreement, but there was certainly a discussion taking place given the complexity of the framework and the guidance. In the middle of March, I have a meeting with Sir Ollie and a senior member of his team, and this is after the point that I've been told that this summary document exists. I specifically ask to see this document and any decision-making audit trail around those judgments at the time. It was made clear to me that that information would not be forthcoming.
Who made that clear to you?
Sir Ollie.
Right. And why?
I suppose I'd go back to, in the actual meeting, the specific reasons were not discussed, but I go back to the context at the time there was a lot of back and forth discussion about the status of how we would treat vetting information. I'd advised the Prime Minister that I would give him detailed advice once I'd seen the relevant documentation.
Physically, where is it? Is it in the Foreign Office or is it in the Cabinet Office or what?
So the UKSV has a secure portal of the highest security standards, and that is the main way within which information is passed relating to vetting between both individual subjects and departments receiving the service. As I said, on the 15th of September last year, documents requested were emailed to the Foreign Office.
Okay. So is there a note at this meeting?
Yes.
Who took that?
There were 3 private secretaries in attendance at the meeting, and I personally took a record of it.
As a result of his refusal to hand over these documents, what happened?
I took the very unusual judgment that I should directly request the information from UK security vetting. And I did that because I go back to my responsibilities to discharge the humble address, which is a responsibility that is unique to me and I take very seriously. I felt that I needed to see some relevant documentation so that I could advise the Prime Minister as to whether we had fully complied and gathered the information that was available and within scope.
And what was Sir Ollie's reasons for not handing it over?
I think his evidence to you on Tuesday very much reflects the nature of the conversations that we were having at the time. He would prioritise, I believe, and I can't talk about his judgments and decisions. I can only talk about my judgments and decisions, but I think he has set out his view to this committee.
Is it about the legal position, amongst other things?
Would it be helpful if I set out the judgments that I took in reaching my decision?
Okay, let's do it that way.
Because I feel that I can only really represent my own judgments. So once I had read the document at the end of March and I'd seen the recommendation that it made, clearly that information was significant and pertinent to my role in discharging the humble address. I did a number of things at that time. I commissioned legal advice on the treatment of that document and its relevance to the scope of the humble address. And I think that's an important thing to stress because the wording of the humble address is both broad and specific at the same time.
Yeah.
And I felt it was important that I received expert advice on the handling of that sensitive personal information and how it applied. I asked security policy experts to give me advice on the legal framework, but also their policy framework for how I should handle that information. I spoke
Has there been a challenge from Sir Ollie about the legal framework? I mean, did you feel...
Not specifically at the time. I do not remember Sir Ollie specifically mentioning the Constitutional Reform Act 2010.
No, I don't think
recall
he doesn't
that.
seem to be talking about that very much. Actually, it seems to have been friends of his
speaking
speaking to the media more than him, it sounds like.
Yes, I mean, and I don't want to in any way misrepresent Sir Ollie's views. That is on the record to this committee. The third thing I did is I spoke to the senior official who was liaising with the criminal investigation because I wanted to ensure that the handling of this document wouldn't prejudice that criminal investigation. And I also took expert advice from my priority and ethics team as to any other considerations I should take into account. The earliest opportunity where I was able to receive that advice and ask questions of experts was on the 13th of April, and I told the Prime Minister on the 14th of April. And I personally reached the conclusion that having seen all of that expert advice, that this information was within the scope of the humble address, and my responsibility is to the Prime Minister in advising him as to whether I had fully complied and the government has fully complied in both the letter and the spirit of the humble address. And I felt that this was pertinent information to discharge my responsibilities.
Did you go to the Cabinet Secretary?
Yes.
At what stage did you go to her?
I told the Cabinet Secretary once I'd read the document, and I explained the actions that I was going to undertake.
You didn't go to the Cabinet Secretary at the stage when you and Sir Ollie were having a disagreement about whether you should get access to the document?
I don't recall specifically going into that level of detail. The Cabinet Secretary is obviously my line manager and is the principal advisor to the Prime Minister. She would have been aware that I was having regular discussions with all government departments about obtaining information.
All right, thank you. I'm going to pass you on, but before I go to Sir John, I think that Edward's got a question which is a follow-up, have you?
I just wanted to clarify the timelines in terms of when you said you got the you read the report on Tuesday. You also said there was an audit trail that included an email from the Security Department to the, I think you said the Chief Operating Officer of the SCDO, which outlined the mitigations that their Security Department was recommending. When did you see that email?
That was after I'd spoken to the Prime Minister on Tuesday the 14th. You will see from the readout that the government has published that the Prime Minister instructed further fact-finding immediately and urgently with the specific intent so that I could advise him on how to inform Parliament.
And what is your professional judgment on whether or not the mitigations that the FCDO Security Department was recommending were adequate to manage the risks that you read in the UKSV report?
As I said to the Chair, I think my responsibility and my role here is to gather the information and not to pass judgment, and that is exactly why Sir Adrian Fulford has been asked to undertake an independent review.
So did the Prime Minister, before making the decision to sack Ollie Robbins, had the Prime Minister also seen the mitigations that would have been put in place? Was it his judgment on whether or not those mitigations were appropriate?
I can't comment on a decision-making process that I'm not directly involved in.
The Prime Minister had seen both, been briefed by you on the UKSV,
Yes.
and had seen the email of the mitigations that were being put in place?
I don't want to get into exactly who has seen what information. I hope you respect that that is to protect national security. I can confirm that the Prime Minister has seen relevant information.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just look at three aspects. The first one, we now know that the then Cabinet Secretary sent a note saying that Peter Mandelson should complete his developed vetting procedure before an announcement was made. We also know that Philip Barton made essentially the same, expressed the same view, and Sir Ollie Robbins told us that it was strongly his view that that should have been the case as well. I mean, can you tell us whether that is the official Cabinet Office view, and what you have discovered about the fact that it was not followed through?
So my view is that due process was followed, and if I might explain why I believe that, it is because the process, as I've outlined to the committee, is that UKSV make a recommendation and the Foreign Office make a decision as to whether to grant DV. That is the process, and that is the process that is agreed with the Foreign Office.
But what I'm talking about is before UKSV had made any recommendation. It is the fact that the Cabinet Office have said the appointment shouldn't be announced and made until DV had been completed, and yet that was what happened against the strong advice of the Cabinet Office.
If you might forgive me, I can't comment on events that took place or processes that took place ahead of me becoming the senior official responsible for the humble address. I wasn't involved.
You weren't involved, but
No.
you represent the Cabinet Office, and that was the Cabinet Office view at the time.
It was the Cabinet Secretary's view, and he gave the former Cabinet Secretary's view, and he has provided evidence to this committee.
And the former Permanent Secretary's view.
Yes, and he has provided evidence to this committee.
Okay, so is that part of what you are examining in the
It
course?
is part of what Sir Adrian Fulford will now independently review.
Okay.
My job is to gather information in order to comply with the humble address.
Okay, so can I then come to the actual outcome of the TV process? I think you said that UKSV sent a 10-page document essentially setting out their findings. One assumes that that must have included the traffic lights. I mean, a 10-page document cannot exclude the final recommendation, which is not to give clearance.
That is correct, and the government has published an excerpt from a template
Indeed.
which would have been included in that document.
Which is the one which I put to Sir Ollie, and he said that he, even until that moment, and the moment of publication, he had not been aware of it. Did that
Can't
surprise
comment
you?
what Sir Ollie has precisely seen. He's given evidence to you directly. All I know is my audit trail is entirely between the security team in the Foreign Office and security officials within UKSV, and that is normal practice. I can't confirm what information was briefed to Sir Ollie as part of his decisions.
But the fundamental difference, the discrepancy that we heard about when Sir Ollie gave us evidence was that you have confirmed just now the summary briefing document from the UKSV would have said that the recommendation was to deny clearance, and Sir Ollie has told us that he was told it was leaning towards denial, but it was a borderline. Now those two things just don't equate.
I can only confirm what I have seen. I don't know what briefing Sir Ollie received. It is an event that I obviously wasn't party to.
Isn't that pretty fundamental to the exercise you're conducting?
So what is fundamental and relevant to my exercise is whether I've been able to see and gather all of the relevant information to fulfil the humble address and discharging our responsibilities and the government's responsibilities to Parliament.
Sorry, do you mind if I just...
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes, if you could just clarify, for the purposes, the summary document and the template that has been published by the government now, setting out the sort of process. The two red boxes just say what they were and that they were the ones ticked.
So I would not normally reveal any content of any vetting document. And if you look at what the government has put on gov.uk, we do not set out what the document says. Because of the public discourse and commentary on this very sensitive document, it is now in the public domain, not through the government's issuance of this information, but through a leak that took place last Thursday. And please forgive me, I do not want to put myself nor the government in a position where I'm sharing information that is within the vetting file.
No, but the government did take the decision to publish the public
Yes,
template.
and it is an excerpt. And forgive me again, I do not want to provide information that is of a personal nature that is within the vetting document.
But if people were to read The Guardian, they would see two red boxes that have been ticked in Peter Mandelson's file, and the two red boxes would be that he was a person of high concern, and the overall decision or recommendation was that clearance be denied or withdrawn. For the sake of argument, let's just say that is what was in those papers, and perhaps we can move on from that.
Yes, I shouldn't comment on what The Guardian have said.
Indeed. So can I, before just moving on to my final area, can I confirm that the Foreign Office had the 10-page summary, but Sir Ollie Robbins didn't see the 10-page summary? He was briefed on its contents by the Director of Security, and therefore, in seeking to try and explain the two different views, is it possible that there was simply a failure of full communication in the briefing of Sir Ollie Robbins that took place?
I can't comment on a briefing I wasn't party to. As Sir Ollie said, his professional security team briefed him. There's a record of the decision that was taken off the back of that briefing. They are the facts as I can see them.
Okay.
And we're hoping to have other evidence that will cover that.
We'll wait and see. Can I finally move on to one other part of this process? When exactly did the Cabinet Office and yourself discover that the UKSV recommendation had not been complied with by the Foreign Office?
So I wouldn't quite use those words myself,
right.
but
Yeah.
I became aware of that information when I read the documents on the 25th of March.
The 25th of March. And when did you discuss it with the Cabinet Secretary?
Very shortly afterwards.
And when did you tell the Prime Minister?
On the 14th of April.
So why was there such a long gap between you and the Cabinet Secretary discovering this and you're going to tell the Prime Minister?
I don't want to be unhelpful in repeating what I said to you earlier, but I immediately sought legal, policy, propriety advice, because this is such an unusual thing for a government official to do, and to handle that sort of security information. I believe I have a responsibility to handle that sensitive information within the framework of both the law and the guidance that I am subject to. And I did not feel that I could share that information until I understood the consequences and the authority that I had to share the information. And as I say, yes, it did take some time to get that expert advice, to ask questions. I firmly believe that that is the professional and appropriate thing to do when dealing with such sensitive information that is so important to be protected as part of our overall national security framework. And yes, that did take some time.
It took 3 weeks.
It took the time between the 25th of March and telling the Prime Minister on the 14th of April, and I truly believe that I acted as swiftly and effectively and appropriately as I could.
Would it not be the position that up to about a dozen lawyers and officials, by the time you got to tell the Prime Minister, already knew that the more it was being discussed, the wider the circle was coming, but the person who didn't seem to know was the PM?
I was able to obtain advice without experts seeing the vetting information or seeing any of the information contained within it or describing the information contained within it. And I think that is a really important point to make. A very, very small number of people have actually seen the document. And I felt able to get that expert advice by describing the process and the information, the sort of information that was contained within it.
Narrowing it down to the point, which is that if, let's say, the red boxes were ticked, that point, that the red boxes had been ticked, and yet the Foreign Office had given clearance, that narrow point, without divulging any further details, was known by quite a wide number of people, wasn't it, before the PM was told?
I think it is a small number of people that was proportionate and necessary in obtaining expert advice.
Would that be up to a dozen?
I think I would need to confirm the precise numbers, but I kept a named confidential list of the reasons why people knew that information.
Okay. I think, Dan, you've got a question.
Sure.
2 questions, right, and then I'm moving on to Alex.
Just to follow up on this document, is it the case that a minister would ever have been shown one of these documents? Do you have an idea?
It's highly unusual, but at the point at which I told the Prime Minister, I only shared with him the very minimal information that this document existed, and I did share with him the overall recommendation and explained the process under which final DV should have been granted.
And in relation to your responsibility overseeing the government response to the humble address, we've seen Simon Case's advice that developed vetting should have been sought before the announcement of the appointment. Have you seen any notes of meetings or notes in response to why that wasn't followed? Was a decision taken not to follow that advice?
I have seen a lot of information, all of that information relating to the appointment that we had at the time of the publication of the first volume has been published. And obviously this is an iterative process. We are now at the final stages of information gathering, and I've just not seen further audit trails relevant to it. There may be final things that I haven't yet had the opportunity to read.
Million people been away before.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. You've rightly talked about the importance of keeping this highly classified information in the vetting system away from the committee and away from the public generally. But there appears to be at least 2 occasions where this information was leaked to the press. 2 days after you informed the Prime Minister, there was a Guardian article on the 16th of April. But about 6 months before, there was an article in The Independent where it was suggested that Peter Mandelson had failed his vetting, although erroneously applied to MI6 rather than the UK vetting service. On September last year, which organisations might have had access to that information and might be able to share that with the press?
And I'll be very clear, there are 4 distinct processes that would have been relevant to the appointment process. There is the due diligence undertaken by the Propriety and Ethics team in the Cabinet Office. There is the conflict of interest process, which is undertaken by the Foreign Office. There is the UKSV developed vetting process, which is, as I've described, entirely within a box between the UKSV and the Foreign Office. And then there is strap clearance. And I'm not able, in this public forum, to talk about the details of the last 2 processes. I hope you understand for good reason.
Okay. And then when the information was shared with the Prime Minister, the whole of Number 10 would have been able to know that information, or how many individuals roughly in that circle might have known about it?
I told the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister and the PPS to the Prime Minister of the information I needed to share with the Prime Minister directly. And I formally set out the basis upon which the information I have divulged should be handled in a formal note to the PPS, to the Prime Minister, to make clear that this could not be shared beyond a named list.
Thank you. And what is the penalty under the Official Secrets Act for sharing such information?
I'm afraid I am not a lawyer. I don't know. I probably would need to come back to you, and I suspect that would need expert legal advice.
Okay. And finally, Sir Ollie Robbins said to the committee this week that he felt there should be prosecutions for the leaking of this information. Do you share that view?
I won't comment on other people's judgment. As I said to you, I am not an expert in this matter, and I haven't come here to opine on it.
Thank you. Just returning to the UKSV security vetting system and respecting your comments on the sanctity of the system. Just to be clear, have you ever seen any UKSV form of this type of form or of any nature prior to this process?
No.
And would it be right to say that broadly most senior civil servants never ever see a form of this nature?
Yes.
Is it also right to say that information about UKSV is only verbally communicated department to department?
No, it is on a secure system, so it is normal for an overall summary of their recommendations and the risks identified to be shared on a highly secure portal and it is written down, and that is shared in a written form on the portal with the body that the UKSV is providing a service to.
So in this case, for this particular appointment, this body is the FCDO.
Yes.
And Sir Ollie, as we heard in his evidence, has told us he's never seen this form until it was leaked or published. He says that the recommendation that was verbally briefed to him, which we can't see any notes of that meeting, was briefed to him as leaning to or borderline. I showed him said document, and I understand that you don't want to comment about this, but this has also been published officially now, an excerpt by the Cabinet Office, so that's why I'm pointing to this. It's a make recommendation body, so it's this isn't binding, as you've said, but the form very clearly shows high concern, clearance denied or withdrawn. We are being told, or we've been led to believe, that both of these boxes were marked in the red. How, in your opinion, would that be verbally communicated as borderline to Sir Ollie?
We have very, very experienced security professionals who provide briefings, and obviously they have to take a judgment as to how to share information up the chain. I believe it is quite unusual for a permanent secretary to be directly involved in this sort of decision making. I'm afraid you would have to ask the individual who took the decision on how to brief Sir Ollie.
Would you expect, as part of the procedures of how the civil service operates, that there would be a meeting note of these decisions, or how these decisions are verbally briefed, without disclosing contents of the security vetting?
So all civil servants are great administrators. We are famous for our record keeping, and the Civil Service Code requires us to take accurate notes and to handle information within the legal framework. I do believe it is possible, without revealing the information within this sort of file, to set out a high-level conclusion, but that must be a judgment for the individuals making the decision.
I'd like to go on to the judgment point, because a lot seems to rest on judgment when there seem to be clear processes, but where this isn't quite matching the version of events we're hearing from multiple people is where the judgment part comes in.
Mind if you move, before you move on, if I can just ask this, because there's a certain amount of debate in the media this morning about whether or not Ollie Robbins provided Number 10 with an account of the decision-making process last week and before he was sacked. And I just wondered if there was an account, if there was a record of his decision-making process that you were given, and if so, if it would be published?
So any information that pertains to the Prime Minister's decision, I don't think is within the scope of the humble address. That would be a decision for the owner of that information.
That's the questions I've got, Chair, on judgment.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
And then I'll come to you, Ed, after Emma's finished. I'm sorry to crash into you.
Related to the Chair's question, on the judgment issue, and so Chris Wormald told us this in his answer to our session, that the due diligence is in two parts: identification of information and then judgment. And the first part seems very clear, and there's a clear process which seems quite straightforward. But on the judgment, everything gets murky because it's down to individuals applying their own judgment. And you've set out clearly today how you sought extra advice in your decision and your judgment process. How, without telling the Prime Minister that developed vetting and had in essence failed, or that the recommendation was to not proceed, could the appointing minister, which is in this case the Prime Minister, make a judgment on any of this?
I think that is the very heart and the substance of the debate, and the Prime Minister has set out his views on how he feels he could and should have been told this information. And I'm not here to sort of add in my role. I think the Prime Minister has been very clear in the statements he's made to the House.
My final question, thank you. Do you think, and looking at the Civil Service Code of Conduct, which we went through as a committee recently, do you think the Prime Minister was adequately served by either the permanent secretary of the FCDO or indeed the FCDO by being kept in the dark, even when those Bloomberg emails came to light and he was being made to stand at the dispatch box and speak to a system where some people in the civil service knew that there was more to it, and he was still being sent out without all the information to hand. Do you think he was properly served by the Civil Service Code of Conduct by those briefing him?
It's not for me to opine on. As I say, I think the Prime Minister has set out his views as to the answer to your question.
Thank you. You want to go next and then Ed? Okay.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. When you sought the legal policy and PIT advice, did you speak to anyone in the Foreign Office and the decision-making chain, Ollie, or any of the people below Ollie who may have seen the documentation to try and get an understanding of what they did?
If I can refer you back to my remarks earlier, I had a specific conversation once I was aware that such a document might exist directly with Sir Ollie. And it was made clear to me that that information would not be forthcoming. And so it wasn't until I told the Prime Minister, who instructed me to undertake formal fact-finding, that further inquiries were made immediately of the Foreign Office.
And as much as you can tell us about those inquiries, did you pick up concerns from the Foreign Office system about how this had come about? Were people worried about the way the decision had been taken or the information had been conveyed? Can you share any of that with us?
So at this point, the audit trails are documented, and I think the summary of that is, of course, yes. And I think Sir Ollie, in terms of your question about concerns, I think Sir Ollie has made clear in his evidence to you that he was concerned and he remains concerned about that information being treated now in the way it is. This is so unusual to be talking about this in the public domain like this.
But in particular, I was just wondering about this discrepancy between the what he says he was briefed at and what the form said. Did you pick up within your Foreign Office conversations any other evidence about concerns in the system about that?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll go to Ed and then I'll go to Afra. That's all right.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify. You obviously had a conversation with Sir Oliver about accessing the information, but prior to that, had there been a conversation with Sir Ollie about the advice that he received, and did his answers to your questions around that match the evidence that he gave to the committee yesterday?
So no, because I didn't know anything about the decision-making or the process that had been undertaken within the Foreign Office.
Because there weren't any records.
Because there weren't any records, and when I was asked to understand it and for information in line with my role on the humble address, I was told that information would not be forthcoming.
Subsequent to you gaining access to the UKSV, was there a conversation with Sir Ollie about the advice that he received and the decision that he made?
No, because I didn't know that he'd received advice at that stage.
Subsequent to you receiving access to the UKSV report, did you have a conversation with Ian Collard, who was the head of security at the time, to establish what advice had been given to, or what information had been shared with Sir Oliver?
I didn't personally, because I asked my Director General leading on the fact-finding that was commissioned by the Prime Minister to have that conversation.
Did the information that was provided by Ian Collard differ from the evidence that Sir Oliver gave to the committee yesterday?
That is not for me to share. I would advise that you should talk to the Director of Security directly. I understand he's coming to give you evidence.
We're hoping so, yeah.
Yeah, the fact-finding that the Prime Minister commissioned has not yet formally concluded, although I should make clear that the vast majority of the investigation, all of the information has been confirmed by the Foreign Office as being divulged to us, and I have read all of that information.
And when you briefed the Prime Minister on the limited amount of information you were able to share with the UKSV, the risk mitigations, or the, I don't know if you briefed or you provided, please clarify, the mitigations that were outlined in the email, did you also at that point provide the Prime Minister in any form with information as to whether or not the advice of the Foreign Office Head of Security differed from the did you also provide information to the Prime Minister in any form about what the advice of the head of the Foreign Office Security Department was proposing and whether or not Sir Oliver acted on that information?
No, because at the time I briefed the Prime Minister on the 14th of April, I did not have, I had not seen that email.
So in terms of the Prime Minister's decision to fire Sir Oliver, he was not in receipt at that point of all of the information, only the limited information that you provided relating to the UKSV.
That is correct, and that is why the Prime Minister immediately tasked further fact-finding directly with the Foreign Office to ascertain as much information that could be within scope of the humble address and the judgments that were taken.
But he'd already fired Sir Oliver without all of the additional information pertaining to the mitigations and the advice of Foreign Office security officials.
Sorry, would you mind repeating that
I'm
question?
just trying to work out the timeline in terms of,
yes, of
when,
course.
what information the Prime Minister had when he made the decision to fire Sir Oliver, and what information was provided to the Prime Minister subsequent to that. I'm especially thinking about the email with the mitigations in it, or the advice of the security officials within the FCDO, or Sir Oliver's memory of the advice that he was provided.
I can confirm that the Prime Minister would have had relevant information, and whilst I must make very clear I'm not involved in the Prime Minister's decision here, I do know that there were conversations directly between the Prime Minister and Sir Ollie.
Thank you. I wanted just to go back through some of the questions about the process, and then also asked generally about kind of security vetting more broadly. Sir John mentioned this before, but Simon Case had made it clear that security vetting should have occurred before Mandelson's appointment was announced. And it was only in September 2025, following the concerns about Mandelson's appointment, that the PM then asked Chris Wormald to look into the process for vetting. Why do you think that he needed to ask another opinion when he already had the view of the former Cabinet Secretary on that issue?
I cannot comment on a process that I wasn't involved in. My absolute role here is to make sure that I gather information in relation to the humble address, and I've not been privy to any of the events or processes prior to me taking on this role.
So as part of the humble address information, will there be any information that UKSV might have provided to Chris Wormald as part of his review into the vetting process?
The humble address will disclose all of the information that is relevant in line with the terms of the humble address. If it is in scope, it will be processed for publication.
Okay. And as we've talked about quite extensively, the FCDO is a make recommendation department. In this instance, because UKSV, as we've now discovered on the form, essentially recommended against granting security clearance, the PM said when he found that out, he felt he should have been told. Is it your view that generally you think ministers or the Prime Minister should be involved in that final decision on whether or not to grant security clearance?
I think it's a judgment for the individual decision-making authority. In this instance, that is the Foreign Office.
Okay, thank you. Sir Oliver Robbins, in his evidence that he gave to this committee, said that there was a feeling of constant pressure in the Foreign Office around the need to get Peter Mandelson into his position. Do you have any kind of views on that? Were you aware, I appreciate you were in the Cabinet Office, but of this pressure that was happening at the time?
Was there any evidence, in fact, that was found? Things like call logs or emails in her doing her job? Did she come across anything?
I can't comment on events that I wasn't privy to. I wasn't involved at all, as I stated up front. As part of the humble address information gathering process, I've not seen any documentation that would formally confirm that level of pressure. But I must repeat, I'm only looking at information in the audit trail and the documentation that I've been given in relation to the humble address. I can't comment on the atmosphere at the time. I wasn't involved.
Thank you. You shared some information around the claim that the Cabinet Office questioned the need for vetting, and you set out how you think that occurred and the correct, as you see it, interpretation of that. Are you aware of any special advisors who are suggesting that Mandelson might not have needed vetting? Has that come up in any of the paperwork that you've seen?
I have shared with you the information that I've gathered as part of the humble address and the document trail I have seen.
So would you, though, given that we've talked about the kind of level of note-taking that is required and where there might be notes and minutes, would you have expected to see notes in relation to that from a special advisor or PPS?
So I should make clear, like, if the civil service, I really do agree with Sir Ollie, it is our job to keep an audit trail and to record information on, and particularly of key decisions, but the civil service does not record every single interaction, every single conversation. That would be highly inefficient, and of course there's a judgment that needs to be taken about record keeping. So ultimately, if there were discussions, it's not unusual for either Number 10 or other private offices to call to ask for a process update. But I can't really comment because I've not seen any audit trail.
Thank you. Obviously, we've now heard in this case that Peter Mandelson was granted security clearance despite the recommendation of UKSV, and that he had obviously had risks or mitigations that were managed. Are you aware of any other individuals who might be in a similar position where the ultimate granting of security clearance is different from that recommendation by UKSV?
So this is exactly why the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister last week paused the ability for a Make Recommendation Department to take a different view to UKSV, and the government security team within the Cabinet Office is undertaking an urgent review to answer your question.
Okay. So, Sir Oliver Robbins, in his evidence to the committee, told us that Peter Mandelson was given access to classified documents before he was given granted his security vetting. Would you say that's unusual?
So my understanding, and this is based on discussions I've had with Foreign Office officials, and I should confirm that both Foreign Office officials and I gave evidence to your sister committee, the ISC, earlier this week on this matter. And this is entirely for the judgment of a department. Peter Mandelson would have been granted an interim clearance, and ultimately I believe that an exception was made for him to see certain information, and that is within the framework that the Foreign Office has. But again, I'm not the expert. It is their protocol and policies, and I'm sure you will want to ask the experts on this matter that question.
Obviously, we've talked a bit about how accurate notes are required to be kept, although obviously not every single conversation that happens. Will the humble address include notes or a minute on the Prime Minister's decision to appoint Lord Mandelson to the position?
So in the humble address volume 1 that has already been published, we have shared all of the documentation relating to the Prime Minister's decision. That is already published and publicly available.
So, as part of that, or do you know why his appointment appears to have been made without saying that it was subject to security clearance?
I can't comment on a process I wasn't party to at the time.
And just thinking through where there might have been other political appointments into roles. I mean, it's quite unusual, obviously, to have a political appointments, especially to such senior roles. We know, for example, however, that Jonathan Powell is a political appointment as the Prime Minister's. He's obviously the National Security Advisor, but he was also Special Envoy for the British Indian Ocean Territory, and he was given that appointment on the 6th of September 2024. But I understand that in August he also held meetings like Mandelson did with FCDO officials and was given access to classified information. The Prime Minister was asked about this in Prime Minister's questions yesterday, but actually didn't answer the question. Are you able to provide information on what kind of security clearance he had prior to taking up the role in September?
I hope you'll forgive me, I can't comment on individuals' security clearances. That would be inappropriate in this formal public setting.
Do you think
in fact, it is a critical part of the protections in place for the national security vetting system.
Thank you.
Fleur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to ask you some questions about your document gathering, but going back to the documents referring to the very early stages of the process before the vetting and before the appointment. So first of all, about the pre-appointment conversations that Morgan McSweeney may have held, would there normally be documents held of the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff discussions about the potential of an appointment and the merits of that appointment? Should there be documents on that?
I'm not here to opine on the judgments that would have been taken by private secretaries and individuals in those meetings. As I've said, it is a civil service requirement for us to take records of and to make sure there is a formal record. I can't give an opinion on things that relate to before my time as being responsible.
I suppose I'm really asking. I was a minister. Every single conversation I had, it felt like that it was definitely being documented very, very well. So but I don't know about Chief of Staffs, Prime Ministers. Are all of their meetings documented in the same way that ministers are?
There is always a thorough assessment of whether a record is needed, and that would have been a judgment undertaken by the individuals in a meeting. And the same sort of expectations for special advisors, for civil servants, for ministers apply. And it is set within the various codes that relate to the terms of employment.
That's helpful because we're seeing him next week, we hope. But in your as you're gathering the documents, are you saying to everyone, have you got these documents? You get them in and you look at them. Are you able to go back and say, there seem to be some missing documents there, and you are investigating a little bit more in your document gathering?
Yes.
So do you think there are any missing documents around those decisions? Have you asked any questions about more evidence of meetings by Morgan McSweeney before he even said to the Prime Minister, should he consider going forward with even the due diligence, even the security vetting? So the early stages, do you think there are some missing documents there?
I think I have undertaken an incredibly thorough and robust approach to identifying all information across government that could be in scope of the humble address.
Thank you. The next question is about the letter from Sir Clive Alderton, who is the private secretary to the King. It's to Sir Clive from Philip Barton, recommending that the political appointment of HM Ambassador. I know you've read so many documents, you can't be expected to know the details of all of them, but in this document it says, the Prime Minister has indicated his intention to recommend during this Parliament a small number of political appointments, plural, to serve as His Majesty's ambassadors overseas, and then he goes on to recommend that Peter Mandelson is adopted as the first one of these political appointments. Do you know if you have asked about whether there were other political appointments in scope at that time, or if it was just a kind of a general catch-all paragraph to say there may be some, here's the first? or if it's more specifically, there were some other political appointments actually being considered at the same time, and therefore it is relevant to the humble address because it's looking at the Prime Minister's decision making around the appointments of ambassadors.
So the humble address wording is very specifically in relation to Peter Mandelson. I haven't asked that question because I do not believe that that would be within the scope of my responsibilities in relation to this humble address.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. And then my third area is around the due diligence itself. The document is there. Did you, before publishing that, did you have to seek the same kind of legal advice and policy expert advice and propriety and ethics team advice about that you did have to about the security vetting? Was there any discussion about whether you would release that due diligence report? Because as you know very well, it contains information about the concerns about reputational risk on previous departures of Mandelson from office, of Epstein, of China relations. It's got all of those things. Did you receive advice before that, or was it very clear that you could publish it?
I've sought independent legal advice on a number of documents which were published, and I continue to retain counsel advice to help me in questions I might have, and you'll appreciate there is a very, very large number of documents. Anything that might be contentious, contain personal information, might prejudice the criminal investigation, I would obviously seek expert advice.
Thank you. My last question on the due diligence is that in the due diligence there's obviously issues that were then taken up in the security vetting, but there's also issues about reputational risk. Would they have been part of the security vetting, or would there have been another process to look further into the reputational risk, which is more a political decision than a security decision, or do the two processes go together to the UK SV?
Well, I think this is part of what we should ask Sir Adrian Fulford to look at, because as I described, there are 4 distinct processes. Ideally, you want those processes and the information to come together. And in this instance, they are conducted at different times, and there are good reasons for why that is the case, and it is perfectly normal for these processes to be undertaken by the individual authorities responsible for overseeing them and the people who have to make decisions about them. But I think it is fair to say that there are some overlaps in the risks and the information, but they are used to assess for different things.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, then, in your role as Chief Operating Officer now going forward and looking at how we operate on this in the future, and that ministers and the Prime Minister are given all the advice they need, this may be an area which is looked at about unusual appointments like this. This is where it really comes to the crux, that there should be more of a reputational risk assessment as well as a security risk assessment.
Well, in many ways, the reputational risk is covered within the due diligence, and I hope the record that's in the public domain indicates some of that assessment. But in my role, both as Chief Operating Officer for the Civil Service and in overseeing the humble address, we are learning a lot of lessons, and I am determined, as is the Prime Minister, to make sure that lessons are learned.
I've got John, and then Edward, and then Alan.
Just a quick follow-up to the questions Fleur has been asking. You've said that all the documentation around the appointment itself has now been included in the first batch of published documents, and that you've been very rigorous to make sure it covers. Why is there no formal record of the actual meeting at which the Prime Minister decided to go ahead and make the appointment?
So 2 things. I want to be really clear about what I have said, in case there's any misunderstanding. I have undertaken an information gathering process which I'm confident has now received all of the information that is within the scope of the humble address. I've done everything I can to identify information. There is never going to be a moment where I can say that every single possible document has been identified. I hope you will appreciate that. I'm confident I've undertaken a process that allows me to be confident I've run the right sort of thorough process. I hope that distinction is clear. And there is some information, given this conversation about vetting, I believe that is relevant to the appointment of Peter Mandelson, that information is still being processed. So it hasn't all been published. It is being processed as part of the information gathering for the humble address. And sorry, I've forgotten the second part.
It's about the actual minute of the meeting at which the Prime Minister said, right, here's the due diligence, and he's advised about all the various other aspects, and he said, yes, I want it to be Peter Mandelson set that in motion.
As I've said to you, it is normal to keep a record of those sorts of decisions.
But there isn't one of this.
I have shared with you the information that we have.
Are you asking why there isn't a further document setting out a record of that meeting?
There are a number of examples where we have had to undertake further investigation based on the information that we have. And wherever you would expect to see more information, we have undertaken follow-up inquiries.
And wouldn't you expect to see further information around this?
I would.
So you're continuing to push?
We have undertaken further investigation.
I can't remember who I said was going to come next. I think it was going to be Edward.
Again, apologies for requesting clarification. So many people have been fired, it's sometimes difficult to keep up. Peter Mandelson was fired because the release of the Epstein files showed that his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein had continued for a lot longer than he had disclosed prior to being appointed. Sir Ollie Robbins was fired because he granted security access to Peter Mandelson, and the security vetting report, the Prime Minister took the view that the security vetting report indicated that Mandelson shouldn't have been, and that he wouldn't have appointed Peter Mandelson in the first place had he had that information. You have seen both the security vetting report, and to be clear, I am under no circumstances asking you to disclose anything that is in that. You've also, and is now a matter of public record, the due diligence report and the information that the Prime Minister was shown. Ollie Robbins was fired for granting security clearance and not providing the information to the Prime Minister earlier. But can you tell us, is there anything materially different in terms of the risk, not the types of risk, not the individual risk, but the risk that the security vetting report shows that is different from the due diligence report that the Prime Minister was shown? Was the Prime Minister aware of all of the risks associated with Peter Mandelson prior to making the appointment?
By the nature of the Prime Minister not seeing or being told that there were risks identified in the UKSV document, I cannot answer that question, because ultimately I don't think I can answer that question without revealing what might be different within the UKSV report. But I would just go back to the Prime Minister did not know about the UKSV conclusion, and he did not know which specific risks were identified at the time of appointment.
Thank you.
Then I think it's Alan next.
Nobody want to come in, Chair?
Do you want to come in next?
Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Without disclosing what may or may not have been in the report, the leaked document to Bloomberg at the time contained within it information that Peter Mandelson had passed on market-sensitive information about high-level discussions happening at Cabinet at a time of grave crisis in Britain. Would information of that nature come up during UKSV? I'm not asking if it did. Would information like that, if Bloomberg had got hold of it, surely our security services could, in theory, find information of that nature?
It could do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your time today. You said earlier in this session that on September 15th, 2025, 4 days after Peter Mandelson was sacked, the Foreign Office officials asked for and received the UKSV documents relating to him. Did they say why they wanted to see these documents in the wake of his sacking, and what documents did they ask for?
I can't go into the detail of the precise documents they asked for. In the audit trail that I've seen, and there may very well have been further verbal conversations at the time, I don't recall there being a reason given.
Would they have needed to give a reason to see the file?
Not necessarily. It's my understanding of the process.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up on something? Because I've just checked the transcript. Because I asked Ollie Robbins this question, and I think it's really been asked of you as well. And I do think it's an important aspect of this, which is so much was known about Peter Mandelson. And due diligence is essentially, as far as I can see, without meaning to be disrespectful, but it's essentially giving some fast streamers the job of looking at what's in the public realm, and they put together a bundle of it. It's not a security briefing in the same way. But I just wondered, given there was so much known about Peter Mandelson, was there anything, without telling us what it was there anything that was in the security vetting that was not in the due diligence report?
Could I talk hypothetically?
No, because I asked Ollie Robbins this, and he said he wouldn't tell me, and so I just want to know if you're going to tell me.
I don't think I can without revealing what was in.
Can't you say yes or no? Can't you say there was something in the direct vetting that was different or more worrying or of more impact than the due diligence?
Forgive me, I'm going to pause before I
No, please,
answer this question, because it's important I get this right. I do not want to make this any harder than it already is for our national security system.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that. We are in a bind.
So I would prefer to answer your question by saying that it could contain more information by the nature of this being an exercise to assess different information for a different purpose.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's all I'm going to get, then I won't push it any further. I have tried. Alan, have you?
Thank you. Yes. Did Cabinet Office officials at any stage consider withholding Mandelson's UKSV summary file from the ISC?
We have undertaken expert advice, and I think there has been reasonable debate and discussion about this, and I hope the committee will understand this is because of all of the reasons I've shared with you about the importance of protecting our national security. And indeed, I won't go into the detail, I had a version of the discussion and the sorts of issues that were being debated with the ISC in the evidence that I gave to them earlier this week. And I think it is right that I set out in more detail to the IC under the security conditions that we have for conducting that hearing more information. I understand why you're asking the question.
So when Sir Ollie's told this committee this week that he was briefed, the officials in the Cabinet Office were very worried about releasing Peter Mandelson's UKSV file to Parliament, that would be correct?
Yes, because, and when we talk about vetting files, I think it's important to recognise there are the inputs to the file, which are comprehensive, very detailed and very sensitive, confidential inputs. And I've always felt strongly that until I'd seen the full trail of information or understood the full trail of information available, that I would take all necessary actions to protect those inputs, because I genuinely believe that that is at the heart of our national security process. And so I think it is accurate for Sir Ollie to describe the discussions we'd had in that way.
Thank you. The committee is seeing Morgan McSweeney next week. Is there any Cabinet Office advice in relation to his decision or the decision to use him and others to have follow-up questions to Peter Mandelson about the Epstein issues?
Forgive me, as you pointed out, Chair, I've seen a lot of documentation in the last couple of weeks. I can't recall seeing anything. But forgive me if at a later date it turns out I have seen.
Do you mind checking ahead of our session?
I'm content to check that ahead of your session and confirm to the clerks.
Thank you. Just on the dismissal of Sir Ollie, did you provide any advice to the Prime Minister
about the decision to dismiss him?
No.
Can you tell us who did, or what sort of advice he received in advance of that? Do you know?
Comment on a decision or a judgment process that I was not involved in.
Thank you.
Good. I have Afra, Edward, and then Dan, and then I think we will draw this process to a close, just to give you the good news. So Afra.
Thank you, and thank you for giving us so much of your time. I just wanted to clarify really on what you've said about the information that has already come through in the humble address and is expected still to come through, because my understanding was that initially it was supposed to be provided by the 10th of April, but there is still further information to come. And from some of the answers that you've given, I've been given the impression that you believe there's still information missing that you might want to look for. So I just wondered if you could clarify that, clarify when you expect all this information to be provided by, and also perhaps let me know whether as part of this information gathering, any ministers have been asked to provide their mobile phones, records from their mobile phones, and if they have all complied with that.
Yes, so there's a number of questions within that, and I'll try and break it down.
I tried to cheat getting one question, three questions into one.
We're trying to finish by 11. If we go over a little, it is.
That is understandable. The first thing I really should say on the record is I'm sincerely grateful to the ISC for the significant amount of time that they have dedicated to working through the information we have passed to them. I'm very conscious that this is, having done it, that this is a very, very painstaking and complex exercise which must be undertaken thoroughly, and it has taken many, many hours of their time that they had not expected to be undertaken. Because we launched this dedicated fact-finding process, and to be really clear with this committee and the House, whilst we're now reaching the very, very final stages, final checks are being done, we've had over the last 24 hours further conversations to double check and follow up the information we've seen with the Foreign Office. All of that information is now being processed, and one of the first things I do when I return to the office is to go back and read everything else that now needs to be processed with the ISC. We had hoped to provide much more of this information by the 10th of April, and clearly that just wasn't possible given the complexity of this exercise.
So just what date do you expect to have it by? Do you think there is information missing, and were ministers asked to hand over their mobile phones and information from their mobile phones?
I described earlier the process that I've undertaken to be as thorough and robust as possible in the information gathering process. I will never be able to say to you that I have definitely got everything, but I will be able to assure the House that we have undertaken robust processes to gather all information relevant to the humble address. To answer your question about electronic communications, there has been a distinct formal request for all ministers, senior officials and special advisors to provide us with direct communications with Peter Mandelson, and we are doing final checks on all of the information that we have received by any form of electronic communication in line with the scope of the humble address.
And all ministers have complied with that?
All ministers have undertaken the processes we have requested of them and complied with the Information Commission.
Edward.
Sorry, I probably should have formed this better in my head before I put my hand up.
Shall I, for the sake of time, shall I go to Dan first and then come to you? Yeah, all right. You see, you got to keep on the ball.
If I just return to the timeline around December and January, I think it's right, and anyone can correct me if it's wrong, but the decision to appoint Mandelson was the 18th of December. The announcement was made on the 20th. Vetting began on the 23rd. Ollie Robbins became the permanent Undersecretary on the 20th of January. I'm just wondering, in terms of what you've decided is in scope for the humble address, will we be seeing any papers relating to the early departure of Sir Philip Barton?
And again, forgive me, I'm recalling all of the information that I have seen. If it is deemed within scope of the humble address, because of either the spirit or the letter of the humble address, then we will process the information that we have received. And sorry to be not more specific. If there is a specific thing you are looking for, I am content to take that away and confirm with the clerks once I have had an opportunity to confirm precisely what it is that you are looking for.
I suppose I'm looking for the reason Sir Philip Barton's departure from the FCDO came at such a critical time in this process.
I'm afraid I just can't comment on that. That is not a decision that, or an event that I was involved in.
I don't want you to comment on it. I want to know if we're going to see notes and minutes of discussions and decisions that were made for the reason that he left the FCDO before he was meant to.
If there is information that is relevant to the scope of the humble address, it will be processed.
Okay. I think you've accepted today that due process was followed throughout the vetting process. And I just want to clarify that that means the decision maker for passing vetting was Ollie Robbins.
I would refer back to the evidence that Sir Ollie has given you, and I think this is an important point to draw out. Sir Ollie would have been responsible at the time and accountable for the decision-making process. It is not entirely clear to me where the formal final decision was made. I have a document back from the UKSB that records on the portal the decision that has been made, and I have an email from the Director of Security to the individuals I described earlier.
Is there, but there's no document, and would one expect a document that reflected the thought process, the discussion, well, we've been told this, but if we mitigate this, so-and-so said it would, I mean, I understand, please tell me if I'm wrong, that these civil service notes are, quite often will be, so-and-so said this, and so said that. And I appreciate there were only two people there, but there was an important discussion going on. We've had this recommendation from the vetting people. We want to proceed with appointing him with mitigations and an actual detailed discussion as to why those mitigations would be relevant and would deal with the concerns that have been raised. I mean, wouldn't that be reasonable to expect? Some kind of, proper note of the back and forth, the give and take, if we do this, that'll work, although we've got to be really worried about that. Do you see what I mean?
In my personal view, I think what you have described would be a reasonable expectation, but I must repeat what I said earlier.
Would that be...
I must repeat what I said earlier, that I can entirely understand why security officials involved in this were trying to avoid documenting information within the vetting file. But I have to agree with you, what you described, I think in my personal view, would have been a reasonable document to record.
Yes.
My question was going to be, would that be recorded within the FCDO or would that be recorded within UKSV?
The FCDO are the decision maker.
I think I might have it in my head now.
Okay.
Number 10 is the appointee.
Which is that putting aside, and I wouldn't ask you to opine on it anyway, putting aside whether or not Sir Ollie Robbins was the decision maker, although ultimately accountable for the decision to grant security access to Peter Mandelson, or whether or not that was the right decision. Put that aside for a moment. your understanding of the process, the powers that the FCDO has, its position as a DV by default, but also only taking advice from UKSV and having the power to make the ultimate decision, and everything that happens subsequently in terms of the decision to withhold information from the Prime Minister or otherwise. Did Sir Oliver do anything wrong, or did he operate entirely within his rights and powers and responsibilities as the Permanent Secretary of the FCDO?
I'm not here to opine on that, and I don't think it's appropriate to give a judgment.
You can't tell us if he stepped outside of
Very
either
sorry,
process.
I'm not going to be drawn into giving an opinion on the actions of one of my former colleagues. I do not think that is within the scope of my responsibilities in discharging the will of Parliament and the humble address.
You tell us if he's a good civil servant?
I would repeat what I just said to you.
And moving on to Alan.
One question, is there FCDO guidance on how it takes vetting decisions? And if so, have you seen that?
I assume so. I've not seen it, personally.
Would it be possible for us to see that and to come to our own conclusions about whether the actions of Sir Ollie were in line with that guidance if it were to exist?
I can ask my government security team to take that request away and report back to the clerks based on our responsibilities in the Cabinet Office.
I'd be very grateful if you did that. Thank you.
Sir Ollie did say to us last week, there is internal guidance on this, which says where we do find a risk, we always try to manage it through our aftercare programme or risk mitigation.
I'm going to give him the final question.
Thank you, Chair. This entire conversation, our inquiry, the way this has been playing out in public, is mostly down to a series of very high-level leaks to very well-known news outlets. We've all talked about the security of the vetting process, the sanctity of the vetting process. Here in Parliament, we have tried our very best to respect that, and all the questions that we've been asked, we've come against the buffers rightly of that system. However, there is a very serious question here about the leaks coming from either or both the Cabinet Office and the FCDO. What is the Cabinet Office doing to ensure that leaks of this sensitive nature never again happen?
I absolutely share your concerns, and I cannot emphasise enough how concerned I am. As the CSPM, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, has set out, there is a leak investigation underway. And I can't comment further.
Well, we're a little later than we promised that we would be, but I hope I do want to express our thanks for you coming in. It's not easy appearing in front of select committees, and we appreciate you agreeing to do so. And I would, I know that you've said that you may be able to provide us with a couple of documents. We're moving at quite a fast pace, and it would be really helpful if we were able to have them tomorrow, if it was possible tomorrow, because we've got other witnesses coming in on Tuesday, and that would be very helpful to us. I've got something else that I ought to just put on the record. On Tuesday, it was put in terms that Sam Coates had reported a conversation, the contents of a phone call. It seems that he hadn't actually reported that, but we do have the two parties to that conversation, we hope, going to be giving evidence before us, and therefore we should be able to get a little bit more clarity rather than it being third-hand hearsay. I think this draws the proceedings to an end. Thank you very much, everybody.